Wait, so he just refused the battle plan? But that's his superior officer. Can he do that? Well, he did, yeah. Yeah, I guess so. I guess you're right. But what happened then, huh? Don't know yet. Great. Okay. Yeah. Bye. September 24th, 1950. Mao Zedong has had some interesting times the past couple decades, and for 13 years until last year was even at war. He does not like how things are turning out in Korea, and doesn't think much of the North's prospects. In fact, he's thinking he might have to send his armies to join the war. Wait, thinking? No, he's talking about it. I'm Indy Neidell, and this is the Korean War. Late last week, the UN forces in the Pusan Perimeter began a big counterattack. This isn't just to break through or break out of the perimeter, it's also meant to tie down North Korean forces in the south so they cannot go up to meet the large invasion force that landed last week at Incheon. That force of Marines succeeded in taking the city easily and began pushing inland. The 18th, as the week gets going, they have secured Kimpo Airfield, and air support can now fly in from local bases. Later that day, other units reached the banks of the Han River. It is also the 18th when elements of the U.S. 7th Infantry Division begin to come ashore and relieve some of the Marines. What are the North Koreans, the KPA, doing in the face of this huge operation? KPA 18th Division was heading south for the Naktong River, but they turn around to engage the 1st Marines. The KPA 70th Regiment moves from Suwon to Seoul. Aerial recon by UN planes reports large numbers of enemy troops coming from the north towards Seoul. But the enemy simply did not have the means to meet 10th Corps. He had been taken by complete surprise, and he was already stretched too thin in the south. The 20,000-odd soldiery he could throw into the battle for Seoul could stem the tide, but not reverse it. Well, that remains to be seen at the moment, for the fight for Seoul gets vicious as this week progresses. On the 20th, elements of Ray Murray's 5th Marines crossed the Han River. They advanced to just 5 kilometers or so from Seoul's Yongsan railway station before they are halted in the hills west of the city by enemy attacks. The fight is bloody. Chesty Puller's 1st Marines are on their right, on the other side of the river, aiming for Yeongdong-po. 7th Infantry Division is to the south, far off, securing the flank towards Suwon. 10th Corps Commander Edward Ullman sets up his headquarters, the 22nd, a few kilometers inland from the still smoking Incheon. The next few days see close combat along the ridges leading to Seoul from the west. The KPA 25th Brigade is the biggest enemy formation here, and the newest, but that doesn't mean it isn't good. General Woi Ki-chan went to military school in the Soviet Union. And down the chain of command, most of the officers and NCOs fought with the Chinese communists in their war. They are well supplied with ammunition and automatic weapons. The 22nd and 23rd, the American and South Korean Marines make little headway, even though Homer Litzenberg's 7th Marines have come ashore to join the fight. Today, as the week ends though, cracks appear in the enemy defenses. Hill 66, right in the middle of the defense system, falls to a company from 2nd Battalion 5th Marines, and this seems to unhinge the defenses, though the week ends and Seoul is still in North Korean hands. But let's say it falls, and the UN forces keep advancing. How far are they to go? The prospect of victory in the South forced Washington to elaborate its thoughts on the future of Korea. These were set out in NSC 81, approved by Truman 4 days before MacArthur's forces went ashore. This document envisaged military operations in the North to complete the defeat of the NKPA. Such operations were, however, contingent on Soviet non-intervention. MacArthur's command was to cross the parallel only provided that at the time of such operations, there has been no entry into North Korea by major Soviet or Chinese forces, no announcement of intended entry, nor a threat to counter our operations militarily in North Korea. The parallel is the 38th parallel, which was the border between North and South before the invasion of the South. So the U.S. still does not want to confront the Soviets in their own sphere of influence. And if either the Soviets or Chinese intervene before UN forces reach the parallel, Washington would pursue negotiations. If an advance into North Korea is in fact possible, the Soviet and Chinese borders would be scrupulously respected. However, in the, shall we say, sensitive border provinces, only ROK would be deployed. Those are the South Koreans, which would create a kind of buffer zone above the 40th parallel. Washington says they will accept less than complete unification of Korea over a clash of titans beyond the narrow neck of North Korea. Well, all of this so far is the fighting in the north. What about down south, where the UN counterattack began back on the 16th? This week on the 18th, U.S. 2nd Division is across the Nakhtong River, taking the hills to the west, which are largely undefended. They are 2 days ahead of schedule, and among the POWs they take are not only regular troops, but rear echelon units, and they even begin overrunning supply dumps. Air observers reported groups of fleeing communists all over the place, and the Air Force, presented with a sudden plethora of targets, practically went crazy. Planes had been grounded on the 16th because of bad weather, but it began to break up the afternoon of the 17th. The next day, the F-51s and F-80s were out in force, strafing, bombing, and napalming. In some cases, where the communists tried to hold on, fighter planes made attacks less than 50 yards in front of their own ground troops. In one extreme instance, the pilot of a T-6 spotter plane dropped a note on a group of communists ordering them to surrender, and then directed a group of American ground patrols over to take them into custody. It's really on the 19th that things get going. KPA command can no longer conceal the Incheon landings from the men, and chaos and panic begin to spread among the North Korean forces around the perimeter. In fact, already the night of the 18th, the KPA 6th and 7th divisions in the far south, who were the furthest from North Korea, begin a hasty withdrawal. On the east coast, the KPA 5th division begins to trek northward, and the ROK 3rd division retakes what's left of Pohang-dong. It is a remarkable turnabout of the fortunes of war, and after 6 weeks defending it, the UN forces are breaking out of the Pusan Perimeter. The 5th Regimental Combat Team takes Waegwan after a tough fight, and this has the effect of flanking the entire North Korean main line of retreat. U.S. 24th Division passes through 5th RCT to continue pressing the fight. British 27th Brigade is assigned to them from the 20th and crosses the Nakhtong just to their south. To the north, Paik Sun-yup's crack ROK 1st Division finds a hole between KPA 1st and 13th Divisions, and the ROK 12th Regiment drives through it 20 kilometers into the enemy rear. At this moment, the only ones who can't really advance are the troops of the U.S. 1st Cavalry Division. Thing is, though they take terrible casualties over a few days, they inflict worse on the enemy, and that enemy, seeing that the ROK 1st Division has broken through and could flank them, withdraws to Sangju. So 1st Cavalry pushes ahead, and that is when the North Koreans' wheels come off. The 3rd Division went from 5,000 men to less than 2,000 in 2 days. Entire units were caught on the road by American air or ground to pieces by American infantry and armor. The retreat became a slaughter. The 13th Division, bled white in the hills by the 1st Cavalry, had already shown signs of internal distress. Faced with failure, the communists were beginning to snap and bite at each other. Officers were being relieved. Men were being summarily executed. Complete units of the enemy 1st, 3rd, and 13th Divisions now fell prey to panic and virtually disintegrated. By the 23rd of September, the Inmin-gun was in full retreat. And on the 22nd of September, Walton Walker issued an order long awaited by 8th Army: pursue and destroy the enemy. The time had come for revenge. By the 22nd, the front really is opening up. The plan, of course, is for these forces to link up with those that landed last week at Incheon. And there is a force already designated to do that. It's a composite force from the 1st Cavalry Division called Task Force 777, called so because the infantry, the armor, and the artillery parts of it all have the number 7 involved in their designations. Leading this task force is Task Force Lynch under James Lynch, and they cross the Nakhtong the night of the 22nd. The 23rd, they're heading up the road in a column, scattering the enemy before them. Today, as the week ends, they reach Paon. There, they halt for resupply. Here's a side story from the North Korean meltdown this week. The morning of the 21st, Lee Hak-koo, a senior colonel in the KPA, approaches American lines in full uniform and surrenders himself. His exact motive for doing so will likely never be known, though it is probably somewhat connected with this. Behind him, the 13th Division, of which he was Chief of Staff, was in utter dissolution. It numbered only 1,500 men. Its headquarters had lost communications and control over its regiments. The division held no line, and its survivors were now fleeing over the hills towards Sangju. The men were no longer waiting to be shot down by their officers. The officers themselves were throwing away their guns. The Americans take him to the rear and question him, and he is cooperative, telling them whatever they want to know about his division. He also tells them it doesn't matter, since that division has been destroyed as a fighting force. He is the highest-ranking prisoner taken so far this war by the UN forces, higher than Chong Pong-uk, also from 13th Division, who surrendered 4 weeks ago. Back to the meltdown. The last couple days of the week, the KPA 2nd, 4th, and 9th Divisions are retreating westward from the Naktong Bulge, followed by the regiments of US 2nd Division. On the 23rd, they break through the enemy roadblocks at Chogyé, and then form a pincers, with 38th Regiment circling north and 23rd circling south. And today, the 24th, they link up beyond the city of Hepcheon, a KPA command post. 38th sets up a roadblock north of the city, and 23rd enters it from the south, driving the defenders into the roadblock, many to their deaths. I said last week that the central UN divisions are under Frank Milburn's recently created 1st Corps, and this week 9th Corps is formed. This is 2nd and 25th Divisions and is under John Coulter. It's 1st Corps that is to drive north and west, and 9th is to head west and southwest to clear the country of the thousands of guerrillas there among the hills and mountains. The ROK are to advance up the east coast, and resistance there is expected to be relatively light. They are backed by American artillery. A minute ago, I mentioned the British 27th Brigade crossing the Naktong near Waigwan. This week is their first combat action, and that's the first British formation here. It's pretty serious action and gets more serious when their American artillery is withdrawn to put out a fire elsewhere on the front. Some men are also victims of friendly fire from American planes, but they do manage to push back the enemy and make their crossings. There are other troop arrivals this week too to back up 8th Army. On September 19th, the Philippines' 10th Battalion Combat Team, about 1,400 men strong, arrives at Pusan. Just a side note here, the British 27th Brigade is about to become the 27th British Commonwealth Brigade because some Australians are very soon to arrive. Anyhow, remember Walton Walker's issues with the Incheon operation getting priority over things like bridging equipment when it's actually his 8th Army that's fighting 90% of the enemy, but have still been expected to rapidly cross the Naktong? He is very frustrated with Douglas MacArthur. Well, on the 19th, MacArthur has a staff meeting at which much of Naval and Marine Command are present, and he openly expresses his own frustration with Walker, musing maybe he should be replaced by someone more forceful. This is too much for Walker, and he tells Doyle Hickey, Deputy Chief of Staff, or well, just now the Acting Chief of Staff, "We have been bastard children lately, and as far as our engineering equipment is concerned, we are in pretty bad shape. I don't want you to think I'm dragging my heels, but I have a river across my whole front, and the 2 bridges I have don't make much." But just after this, 8th Army begins to break out in earnest, and the Marines have been slowed down as they approach Seoul. As all this is happening, tensions are seriously developing, or actually worsening, up north between 10th Corps Commander Edward Almond, also MacArthur's Chief of Staff, and 1st Marine Division Commander O.P. Smith. Almond began demanding immediate results, which Smith, trying to complete the increasingly deadly mission without unnecessarily sacrificing the lives of his men, thought unrealistic. Smith, and most of the other senior Marines, came to believe that Almond was an unrealistic commander, a man who listened only to the voice of the man above him, and was careless with his orders, insensitive to the lives of the men in his command, and far, far too concerned with public relations. Smith has been warning Almond, who has never been part of an amphibious landing before Incheon, that its ease is deceptive, that they only faced small detachments of rear echelon troops, and Seoul is going to be a well-defended city garrisoned by thousands of North Korea's best troops. MacArthur has set tomorrow, the 25th, for the capture of Seoul. But here's the thing. Smith doesn't really even see the need to take Seoul. He, Walker, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff think they should bypass Seoul and isolate it, and then head east and south and meet up with Walker's drive from the south. This would take a huge number of KPA POWs and require less blood. His thinking is that MacArthur's and Allman's obsession with Seoul defeated the very purpose of the landing, because it might let much of the North Korean army slip through. But they knew that MacArthur wanted the capture of Seoul on or before the very symbolic date of September 25th, 3 months after the North Koreans had first crossed the 30th parallel. To Smith, Allman was risking his Marines unnecessarily for a couple of extra lines in newspapers back home, because that was what his commander wanted. He was not impressed. To him, it was a gimmick, nothing more. Well, like we've seen, the Marine advance has slowed down. Allman has asked Smith for a guarantee that he'll make the deadline. Smith tells him he can't guarantee anything, and that was up to the enemy. We do the best we could and go as fast as we could. That's not exactly the answer that Allman is looking for, so Allman even designs his own battle plan to make things go faster. Smith has issues with it, and long story short, he rejects Allman's plan as the work of an amateur. But remember, this is a divisional commander rejecting his corps commander's plan. That's pretty serious, and it does not help things between the two. More on this next week when the fight for Seoul continues. The past couple weeks, we've seen that the Communist Chinese figured out what was going to happen at Incheon and warned North Korean leader Kim Il-sung, but to no avail. On the 18th, as this week starts, Chinese Communist leader Mao Zedong's foreign minister Zhao Enlai meets with Soviet representatives. They are going to suggest, again, that the North Koreans pull back, regroup, and reorganize farther north, and then play on Western fears that the Chinese or the Soviets, or both, will enter the war. Those fears may have some real basis in reality, though. Back on the 7th, Mao recalled his political advisor to Pyongyang, North Korea's capital, and asked him that if the Chinese send troops to Korea, what sort of issues would they face? The answer was that the issues were logistical primarily. For example, getting troops from different parts of huge China to the Yalu River, and from there to the battlefields. Does Mao really want to intervene? The leadership had already made up its mind to intervene, but it wasn't really the leadership. It was Mao. Much of September was deeded over to two main tasks: getting troops to Manchuria and bringing the rest of the leadership over to Mao's view on the need to enter the war. Mao even gave a speech 2 weeks ago about intervention. This is the general outline of what he said. The U.S. would be weaker than people expected. Their morale and performance would be very low because they were waging an unjust war of aggression. The economic and political divisions within the U.S. exacerbated this weakness and vulnerability. Sure, they could produce a lot of weapons and ammunition, but with such extended supply lines, that wouldn't be enough. From Berlin to Korea, the U.S. literally has a two-ocean geopolitical perimeter. You saw how badly the Americans fought during the first few weeks of the Korean War, but this is not because the U.S. has been sloppy about keeping up its non-atomic weapons. No. It's because those fighting are working-class kids who don't believe in what they're fighting for. So they're far less motivated than the Communist Chinese, who also very much outnumber them. As for atomic bombs, Mao says he is not afraid. I will respond with my hand grenade. I, obviously, have more to say on this subject soon. But I do not have more to say today, for this week of the war is over, with sudden breakthrough in the south after weeks of bloody combat, and days of bloody combat in the north after a sudden breakthrough there. And the Chinese situation growing ever more dangerous and thorny. If Mao directly intervenes, what then? The U.S. does not want a war with China. The UN does not want a war with China. The world does not want a war with China. It's so crazy to think that here in September 1950, it feels like we may be getting ready to experience what we just went through in 1939. A local invasion, and then some countries support that which was invaded, and it spirals into a global conflict that kills tens of millions of people. Maybe we've come nowhere since 1945. And then the huge bloody wars in places like Indonesia and China from then till last year, maybe that's just the new normal. Scary thought, since we have atomic weapons now. Guess we'll see soon enough. Or maybe not. Maybe we'll be bombed, go off the air, and we'll never know. It's easy to get paranoid about these things right about now. In just a few weeks, on our Time Ghost History channel, we'll start a series documenting the Chinese Civil War that brought Mao Zedong to power. You should go over there to subscribe so you won't miss it, and while you're there, you can check out the playlist page and see all the other awesome series we've already done there. It'll pop up here in a few seconds. Gareth Miller is the Time Ghost Army Member of the Week. It is the Time Ghost Army that allows us to do this and that and everything we do. Join the Time Ghost Army and be part of it all. These are the newest commissioned officers in the Army. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.